Good morning and welcome back to Planner Craft. So, excuse the camera's being a bit of a funny place. We had a few technical issues this morning, so I've had to give everything a reboot. So today I'm going to be introducing the recipe format to you. Now this is going to be kind of appearing in our forthcoming book and also the magazines when they start. You're going to see a regular feature that is all about recipes. So, what do you need for a recipe? Okay, first of all, you're going to need either a scan and cut or the software for your Cricut or Silhouette or basic shape dies. So as long as you have those things, we can take part. I'm going to try the light, but this could be the straw that breaks the camel's back, so we'll bear with me. Hopefully you can see and hear me okay. If not, please let me know. And hopefully we can try and iron out a few of the glitches that we've kind of had this morning. So we're having issues with flickering cameras and all sorts. So I didn't think you'd really want to see that, so I've had to do a total system reboot and we'll see how we go. So good morning Linda, good morning Deb. If you're watching either on the group or on Facebook or on YouTube, I should be able to see comments today. And let's start with the recipe. So recipes are formed of an initial ingredients section. So if I go through this section first, then I can kind of talk you through the process of working with a recipe. So the ingredients you're going to need, and for this part you might need a notepad, is we're going to work with 3 times BAA123 and BAA022. So that is basically a flag shape, so it has a straight top, straight side, then do a little triangle shape for the bottom, then back up. Okay, and because that's not quite long enough for the size that we want, we've also gone for BAA022, which is a thin rectangle, so that we can extend that shape. So if we were to try and do that by ratio, we're going to end up pulling that center point of our V actually up into our shape, so it starts to look a bit weird. So by adding that extra rectangle, you're going to stop that happening. And you can see that with this little plus sign, that means that we're going to be welding them together. So hence we've got our little 3 times there of both of those. That's going to give you flags. We then have BAA022 again, but on its own this time, which is going to give you a thinner rectangle. BAA012, which is going to be your fatter rectangle, and then you can have an optional additional flag if you want to for your particular sentiment, but that is going to be dictated by what you're using to cut from. So recipes initially started in the book as being things that we do in papercraft, and so you're going to pretty much want same kind of materials from most of the papercraft recipes, which is you're going to want to have some solid colours. Hi Tony! And welcome to the world of scanning cutting. You're going to want some pattern paper, so that can be either in a pad, or I've also got some inserts as well that we can kind of cut into. And if you have some squared paper, we can work on creating some sketches. So typically with recipes you are going to get an initial sketch or some kind of size to work to, so that you actually start to develop your design skills a little bit. But once you have your main sketch, so let's say this here is your main sketch, you might go, okay, if I've got that as my main sketch, but I've only got an A2 card, then we could go down to this one. Or you might say, I've only got an A6 here in the UK, then we can go down to this one. Or it might be even that you go down to DL. So don't think that because the sketch is square, if you haven't got a square card you can't do it. It's just a case of just adapting that recipe. So as with all recipes, you know, you can do your own little touch. Then as you start to develop the sketch, so you might make the sketch through as is to start with, you're also then going to go, well, how can I develop on this? So I've put a few pointers down here as to how we can carry on working with recipes. So you can play with the size of your shapes, both in terms of enlarging them as a whole or shrinking them as a whole, or you might want to have some elements that are smaller now larger and things like that. The orientation of your card, so in other words, instead of having our upright cards here, we can go to a landscape of a card, but also the orientation of your actual objects as well. The scale, so again that's going relative to one another, so it might be that instead of having little page flags and big rectangles, you're going to swap it round so we have big flags and little rectangles. You're going to play with pattern versus solid, and as you want to layer things up, we're going to be looking at offsetting versus just using a larger version of that shape. So offset is really good if you've got a complicated shape that you just want to very quickly do an offset of, but it does put round corners on things on the machine, so that is something to bear in mind if you're working with things like rectangles or anything that's got a point. Offset won't always give you the best option. And of course rotation, so at the moment our sketch is pretty much on the right angle, whether that's the flag's going to be going this way or whether it's coming this way, but there's nothing to say that you couldn't rotate that. And finally, does your material inspire or restrict your choices? So let's start off with our pattern paper and we'll dive straight in. So with our flags, I'm going to do a couple that are patterned and one solid, I think, to get started. So let's pick a paper, and I'm going to go for this nice big floral. So that's one, and then let's go for a leaf one, so that's going to give us a contrast like so. And we can pick a solid colour to go with that. So with our papers, let's see which one kind of pops out to us as tying in really nicely with those particular patterns. And let's go to this nice shade of pink here. Okay, so now I'm going to pop that there, move the inserts out of the way, and let's move to the scan and cut. So if we go close cam, yes, it worked. Can you tell which one was playing up this morning? So let's wake up the scan and cut, and it's been very patiently waiting on the basic shapes. So just for Tony, if I go back and back again, so if you have an SDX, you're going to have the option to go to pattern and into basic shapes, just in that top left. It's very slightly different on CM, but you should be able to work it out. Now, going back to our recipe, we need BA123. So we know that's going to be down towards the bottom, so we can use our double arrow to quickly skip to the end of our pages. And we can just use our up arrow to just get to the page that we need to. And there's BA123. So we're going to tap on that. Now at this point, don't worry about the scale, because we're going to want to make sure that both our rectangle and our flag are the same size. So for now, I'm going to add just one to the map, because we've got that weld. We want to do that first before we do our duplication. So there's our first shape. We can now go to add, pattern, back into basic shape, and this time we need BA022. So there we go. So that's our thinner rectangle, and it's also the wrong way round at this point, but don't worry about that. So I'm going to add that onto my mat. So first of all, let's sort out this rectangle here, because we need that to be pointing up the right way. We're going to go into edit, object edit, and the button top right, which is our rotate key. Nice and simply, we're just going to go 90 degrees rotation. And we can go OK. If we go to resize, we can make a note of that width, so that's 1.97 inches, or if you want to change to millimetres, you can just change it in there, which is going to give you your 50mm. We can click over to our other shape and we can see straight away it's not going to match, so we just need to take it down to 50mm. So you can see as I'm shrinking it down, we're going to be losing that height, but that's okay because that's what the rectangle is there for, so that we have it longer. I'm going to loosely position those over the top of one another. Okay. We're going to go OK, OK again, and then we're going to go into multi-select, which is this little 3 square one here. Now at the moment this is all that's on my mat, so I can go select all, and it's going to select both those shapes. We're going to go OK. Now we need to move those shapes so they line up with each other, so we're going to go to the move function, and then we have a line just in the top here. We can align that left so that we know that then, because they're both the same size, they should line up perfectly. Now if for some reason they look like they've got a little bit of a kick just there, we can go OK and just double check, because once you weld it's permanent. And I'm going to guess that's Deb that's talking as Planner Craft today. That's fine. So let's go into Object Edit, just click off, so then it's going to go back and enable you to click on that. So that says 50. I'm going to go OK, OK. Now because I don't want to move alignment by accident, I can use these 2 arrow keys to swap between the shapes. We can go back into Object Edit and resize and check that one. So it still says it's 50, so it should be absolutely fine. It can just sometimes be a bit of an optical illusion. So we're going to go back to our multi-select and select all. You're going to need both shapes selected because we're going to weld them together. So Object Edit, and then our first button here is Group, which is where we want to keep them as individual shapes but locked to each other in terms of position. But what we actually want to do this time is weld, and that's where we're going to basically rub out the lines between, so it's all one shape, and we can go OK. So you should have something that looks like that. Yeah, I've been having that issue on live streams, that it keeps locking me out of commenting, which is really annoying. But yeah, Facebook caused all manner of issues this morning, so hence Mac had to do a complete reset. So once we've now got our flag, we can duplicate it. So top middle we have a little set of 2 squares and one that has a little plus symbol in. And at this point we can go, I'll have 3 please. So then you have 3 flags. So that's the first part of our recipe done. So now I can move these over to one side, and I know that they'll just sit there. So the next part of our recipe is our 2 rectangles. So we're going to go back into pattern, basic shape, and we need one that is 12, and again I'm just going to add that in there, and one that is 22. So far those are the ingredients for our recipe. So if I flick back to our overhead, So next you need to choose what kind of layout you're going to go for. So I'm going to see if I can zoom in just a little bit closer. Now this could be interesting because I'm just trying to get it with a cable. There we go. And there we go. So we have our square kind of formats in this column here. We have our A2, so American A2, just here. Then we have our A6s, and then finally we have our DL column just here. And I think for today, out of all of them, I'm going to go for this one. So I'm going to go to the A6. So let's zoom that back out. So to help me design on my scan and cut, and what we can do is actually add in an A6 card. So let's go back to the scan and cut. We're going to go add pattern back into our basic shapes, and we're going to set up a guide for ourselves. So pick the rectangle or the square, which is ever closest to your choice of card blank. In this case it's probably 12 for the A6, and then we can resize it to fit. So we are looking at about 105, then we're going to go and press the ratio button, and this is where it's going to take my memory now. 148. Again. Okay. So sometimes it's easier to just put it in and rotate it, but for that one, it's a good way of learning this function here, which is our little ratio key. So you use that whenever you want to alter the height and width independently. Now obviously on a basic shape you're not going to see too much of a difference in terms of it being stretched, but if we were to go to something like our flag shape, and what you're going to see is that whole design gets stretched, not just necessarily the outside corners. So anything that is in the middle is also going to be kind of pulled out of shape. So I'm going to set that onto my mat. So here's our card blank, and then we can start to work on that in terms of building our sketch. So with our sketch for the A6, I have my thinner rectangle going all the way across my card, so I'm going to literally just pop that there. Now if we go into edit, object edit, and resize, when it resizes it's going to go from that center point, but don't worry about the alignment on our card blank too much. You'll also notice that I'm doing that in proportion so that we're keeping that recipe as true to the original as possible. So there's our first shape. Now with our fatter rectangle on my sketch, I've got it rotated, so I'm going to go OK, and straight away I'm just going to rotate it 90 degrees so that it goes round. We can then drag that down. Now at the moment it's way too big for our sketch, so I can shrink that down. So that's looking pretty close. So now I'm going to go OK, and I'm going to tap off my shape so that I have nothing selected. So this is still in multi-select now, and what we want to do is alter all of our page flags at the same time so that we know they are keeping the same proportion. The way to do that is just here we have a little window key, so this is like a window select, and what that means is if we press it, it's going to give us a set of 2 arrows, and that controls your corners of your shape of selection. we want to extend it so that it just covers our flags, like so. Then when we go OK, it's going to select those 3 page flags. Now, to make life a little easier as we're resizing, we can use a line to make sure that they literally just fill one space. So we can align left so that we know that they're in a line that way, and align top. So now we have 3 shapes exactly on top of another, and we can go OK. Now obviously if we were to cut this out at this point, it's going to go around that same shape 3 times, which isn't what we want, but it does make it easier for just temporary grouping so we can move it over. Then we can resize it to suit our layout. So because it resizes from the middle, I'm going to put it slightly higher than I need it, and then as I reduce it, you can see it shrinks down into the middle. That just about there looks good. Okay, so at this point we can go OK, and we can just tap that ungroup function because we've done what we need to, and then we can move them out. So this is a good point to go, actually, is that working in terms of the layout? And I can go, well actually that rectangle in there needs to drop down. But what you might find, because we did that card last, it's going to be sitting on top, so you're like, oh, now what do I do? We're going to go OK, and we're going to use these 2 arrows again so that we can get to the right shape that we want to edit. So this one here. Now if we were to try and press on that and drag it round, chances are we'll accidentally pick up that card guide instead. So this is where we can go into move, and we can use our arrow keys to help us. Okay, and I'm just going to slightly tweak the size of that so it comes down just a little bit. There we go, and that looks a bit more like my sketch. Okay, so we've got our pieces onto our mat. Now you just need to decide what's cutting out of what. So we've done our flags and we know which material ideally we want for that. So those can go up here. And what I'll do is, in a minute, I will trim down my card so that I'm not wasting too much. Now to concentrate on our 2 rectangles. So if I pop back overhead, let's zoom out a little bit. So those are the materials that we're using for our flags. So we need something that contrasts with those to go for that backing shape. So we're going to want something that's a bit more colourful. And what I could use is one of these ones where we've got the solid colour in the background and a bit of detail around the outside. So it's a case of deciding which bit you want to use. I think just to make life a little bit easier, I'm going to go for the one where it's just on one edge. So our strip can be cut along this edge, but we don't want to go right up to the edge, otherwise we risk cutting our mat, which is what we don't want to do. So that will do for that piece. And then we need another piece to cut out our topper. Now in this case, I think I'm going to go for a solid colour. So let's go for a nice soft pink. Okay. So those are the pieces that we want to put on our mat first. So we're not worrying about matting and layering at this point. We are just literally focusing on the key points that are in the recipe. So let's rub our lint roller. So as I put on the craft store page earlier, your lint roller is your best friend. So once you peel off a new strip, just de-tack it slightly on your clothes so that it isn't going to try and pick up the adhesive off your mat too much. Then I just lightly roll it. Once it starts to pick up a bit more dust and things off your mat, then you can start to press it a bit harder. But when it's brand new like this, keep it nice and light, because it does like to stick to your adhesive rather than staying in a nice roll. If you are using a brother mat, you can use a alcohol-free baby wipe wrapped around a scraper. Just allow it a good time to dry before then applying any material onto it, and that will help your mat last longer. Okay, so with that done, the other thing I should say is, as we have some new viewers, is to watch out for anything that you reply to a comment, because I can't see replies, I can only see initial comments, which is a bit weird. So I'm going to apply my material onto my mat. So the smaller shapes I can pop on there first. So let's pop this one over here, like so. Then obviously, as we have 3 8x8s, they are not all going to fit onto our mat at the same time. So we need to do some trimming. So I'm just going to get my trimmer. Like so. And let's trim. So our 2 floral pieces we said are going to go to do our page flags. So what I typically do is I will go into that resize option, check to see how big it is, or usually what's even easier is to count the squares. So then I'll just trim 2 inches instead. So our page flag can fit in pretty much 1 inch, so I always give myself a little extra. So I'm going to go 2 inches. Also want to decide which way you want your paper to go. So if you want your foliage hanging down, make sure you trim it in the right direction to do so. So I'm going to go this way. And then it's about 3 squares down. So always give yourself far more than you need, because then you have room to manoeuvre so that you can pick out bits of your pattern using background scan. And I'm going to do the same for this one. So 2 by 3 again, because we know those shapes are identical. Good, and we can set the remnants from that for another project, and possibly using the same recipe so that you can start to create a pack that then you can put on your craft store. And next we're going to do our long thin rectangle. So that is 52 by 105. So first of all, I'm going to trim it slightly longer than I need for that strip. So let's go to 7 centimeters, because that should be plenty of room to manoeuvre. Okay. And again, I'm just going to leave that as a strip and apply that onto my mat. Now I'm going to go this way round. because of our cutting area. Now if it slightly overlaps down here, I'm not too bothered, because I'm not going to necessarily go all the way down to this corner, because I'm going to try and focus in this top section here, because that's where you've got the most flowers. So any questions so far? Morning, Susan. So today we're working on recipes, which is a kind of a new feature for our forthcoming book. And I'm going to pop that one there. So we have 5 shapes on our mat, so we should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces on our physical mat. So let's get back to the screen where we can load our mat and do our background scan and swap view. Okay, so I'm going to load my mat in. And we're going to do our background scan. So just be aware, if you are using the Artistics Duo mat, that when you do that background scan it can pop out the back. So just give it a gentle tap back in and it'll be fine. Okay, so we have this shape which is going to go onto this card. I'm going to have this shape go onto this one. And we've got the flag that can go on this one. And then we can use our scan to work out where we want to put our flag. So if it's looking a bit confusing and you can't quite see what you're doing, there's a nifty little feature that can help you out. So if we go into the spanner, we can actually lighten that scan just by clicking onto the lighter background with the dots. And then when we go OK, it's going to soften that scan back so that we can see our cut shapes a little bit more. And sometimes that just helps with particularly high contrasting papers, where you just need to see exactly where that cut line is, so you can work out where your pattern is going to go. And if you wanted to, you don't necessarily have to keep it in that upright position. So I'm going to go to Edit, Object Edit, I'm going to go to Rotate. I'm just going to rotate it very slightly, so 10 degrees, and see if we can just pull out a bit more of that detail. Now just be aware of where the top of your paper is. And we can go like that. With this one over here, I'm going to bring it down so that we get more of that colour popping through. So we've got the flowers just here. Now, just to check, we are going to go back into Spanner and make that background back dark again. The reason I do that is just so you can make sure that that cut line does not go off that edge. Okay, then it's on to the next shape. So this one here, we can obviously see straight away that we need to rotate it. So do a quick rotation. Now I'm going to drag it up to more or less where I need it, but then I'm going to go OK, and we have some really nifty features in Move. So we're going to go into Move, and then up top left we have magnifying glass, and we've got Move keys up here. So this is really easy to use when we're zoomed in and we want to be really accurate about where we want to put that box. So I'm just going to nudge that across, and you want to be able to see a little bit of the pattern down the right hand edge here, so that you're not cutting on that edge. Now bear in mind that although it says 200%, the screen is much smaller than what you're seeing in real life, but we can go further, so we can actually zoom in to 400%. So it's still not a 1-to-1 ratio. So we know that if we do that, we can take it back a little bit and it's not going to be too close. We can also move it up towards the top. And then zoom back out. And we can see where our piece is going to cut. I'm going to go OK at this point. The flag is kind of up in this top corner here. This one I'm just going to move down to the bottom. And we can go OK. Maybe nudge it up very slightly away from that cutting line. We can then go OK. OK. Now, most of these are papers in terms of the pattern paper. So the pattern paper is 150 GSM, and that's going to be the first thing that kind of gets cut in all probability. Now, sometimes Scan and Cut does like to shuffle things up a bit, so we'll see how we go. But what I am going to do is pop in my standard blade. I'm going to go OK. I'm going to go into cut. I'm going to go into pressure. And I'm going to take my pressure back down. Now I'm going to take it to -8. I'm using a new blade, but it still seems to prefer -8 to -9. I'm going to go OK. And let's see how it goes. Now I do have my speed at 1 because we're doing something that has acute angles in, so that's where we've got our points on our flags. If you're doing something that it has rounds and ovals only, then you can take that speed up a bit if you want to. So check everything is happy, check your half cut is off if you've been doing lots of vinyl like I have, and let's start to go. I'm just going to go down to the car first. I told you it was going to do something big, but we'll see how it goes. It should be fine. Now if you've done the recent update, you can find that it does go around 2 or 3 times if it thinks it needs it. And don't be afraid to ask questions if you have any, or if there's something you want me to go over in a bit more detail. Especially while it's cutting. So, I know Tony's new to the Scan and Cut. How are you doing, Susan? What types of projects do you get your Scan and Cut to do, and what type of projects do you actually find yourself making? Because sometimes there can be a difference. Okay, so let's check that everything's cut. Looking good. So typically what I'll do is I'll remove the waste. Let's see if I can move that camera a little bit better. There we go. Because it's a good way of kind of checking that everything's cut, and then we can be a bit more gentle when we can be taking off our cut pieces. So just going to very carefully take this one off. Now that one hasn't quite cut through, so I'm going to pop that back on my mat. And let's try the other flag. Yep, that one's not cut through either. That's okay. When we're doing different materials, you can expect to have some that will cut and some that won't. So I'm just going to grab a metal spatula to take off these pieces here. So these are definitely cut. Now obviously if we're just decided to cut straight away now, it will try and cut all those shapes that we've already removed, which we don't want it to do. So let's move back to the scan and cut screen. And we're going to go OK because we've finished cutting. We're going to go back a screen so that we can actually start to edit the shapes. So we can go into edit, and these top three we don't need anymore. Now before you remove them, if this is a recipe that you are going to want to keep using again and again, if we go to OK, we can save it. So that can be saved to the machine or to the USB, the choice is yours. I might just have room on my machine, we'll see. There we go, and it's going to give it a letter and a number, and there's no control over that in the machine, but if you save your designs to a USB, you can rename them on your computer just by inserting the USB into your computer and just giving them a sensible name. So I'm going to go OK. So now I can go and delete those bits I don't need anymore. So we don't need that one. We don't need that one anymore. We don't need that one. If it helps, you could do another background scan. That isn't going to interfere with your cut line. So I'm going to go OK, OK. Then you can check that you've got just those two shapes. You can go back to cut. And off we go. Now this is where it tests out your machine's calibration. So if you do this and you get a slight variation in your cut line, that can mean that your calibration is off. So if you've been moving your scan and cut, in terms of taking it to class maybe, or if you've had a bit of move around in your craft room, then do check your calibration and redo it if needed. Do the same check again. That's more like it. So when your waste actually removes nice and easily, then you know that you've got your job done. Okay. So let's pop back overhead. So we have our piece that's going to go across our A6 card. We have our piece that's going to come down like this to do our verse. We have our flags that are going to come down from the top of our card. Like so. So what you next need to decide is if anything needs like a layer to go over the top to help it pop. So I'm thinking it would be quite nice if I move it up a bit so you can see a bit better for starters. Let's move that so we can take that up. So we could do a little bit of a floral detail that's going to come around here, and we can cut that out of our paper. So this is where the scan and cut comes into its own and kind of leaves the other two behind, because we can work with our actual original papers to bring out elements. So whether we go with our larger scale floral and put that in there, it might be a little bit too big, or I noticed that there's a slightly smaller version of it, which is this one. So I can take that piece of paper out, and because it's on a white background, chances are we can get a nice clean scan. So I'm going to pop that onto my normal cutting mat because we're going to be doing a direct cut, and because there's so many repetitions of the design, we don't need to worry about the placement on our mat. So let's go back to close scan. We're going to go OK, and we're going to go home. Okay. We can go to scan, direct cut. We can use the machine this time. Now, with direct cut, you have two modes. You have black and white or colour. Colour is good if you've got like a soft tone in the background of your paper, so that your pattern isn't quite so clean cut. But black and white is good where you've got a really good level of contrast between your actual image and the background. So I'm going to leave it black and white. And we're going to tell it to start. Okay, it's peeled up on the one corner, that's okay. So lift up the lever, bring it back. There we go, and we can see it's just peeled up on that corner down there. So just give it a little rub down, make sure that it's not going to stick. If it still pings back up, then you might have to use a tiny bit of tape or something to hold it there. But most of the time with paper you'll find that it will stick back down. You just might just snag the blade a little. And lower that scan glass back down. So when we're scanning to do a direct cut, it's better that you can scan it in position 1, unless what you're scanning is thicker. So if you want to scan something that's, say, got a little bit of texture to it, like embossing powder, then you can lift it up to that second position so that you can actually scan it and cut it out. So let's try it. The other option is, just to make it a little bit quicker for you guys, is we can actually limit how much of a scan it does. So I'm going to take it down to 12 by 6 because it's an 8 by 8 piece of paper, but we don't need that full amount to be able to get what we need. So I'm going to go OK. What that means is when it scans, it's going to do it again. You're having a bad day today, aren't you, scan and cut? And what is snagging? Let's try it in position 2 just to get it scanned. It's going to throw a little bit wobbly at you, just how it start anyway. It should go through then. There you go. If you're consistently getting issues like that, the chances are you've got a tiny bit of something stuck in your machine. So there is a video on our YouTube channel, and it appears under the most watched videos. And it's all about maintaining your scan and cut and looking after it, so that if you're having issues like that, that you can actually solve them. Because most things are fixable. So let's go OK. So when we go OK, it's going to do a little bit of a kind of preliminary scan of the area that you've done and trace out what it thinks that you're looking for. But you'll notice that you've got your 2 arrows again, so we're used to this from our window select. So we know that we can alter this by clicking and dragging and bring that in. And we can do the same here. So again, it's going to rule out most things, and we can just bring it right down so it's just that one that's selected there. Okay, that's looking perfectly fine. It's going to seem a bit weird because it's going to cut it out in the middle of a piece of paper. Don't worry about it, you can use the rest of that sheet for things like other small page flags and so forth. So it's not a case that you're going to be wasting all that paper. Now, I'm going to go to preview, which is when it's actually going to do your definite trace, and you're going to see it's going to pick up a few other bits and pieces again, which we don't want it to do. So if we go to ignore object size, we can tell it how big of a piece that we want it to just go. Actually, I'm just going to ignore you. Now, the bit that we're scanning is actually quite big, so we can actually push that size up quite a bit, and it's going to clean up our scan lovely. There we go. So we can go all the way up to there, and it's going to rule out everything that we don't want it to cut. We're going to go OK, and the other option that you have down here is smoothing. I just usually leave that as default, so we can go OK. Now at this point you can decide if you want to put a whiteboard around it if there's room, which in my case there isn't quite so much, and to do that you would use your offset button just here. other times you might decide that actually you've scanned a bit of text and you want to put a shape around that text. That's what this key is for. So it takes whatever the object is, and instead of going round and fussy cutting it, it's going to do things like cut a circle around it, or put a rectangle around it, or it's even got like a nice curvy frame that it can put around if you wanted to. You also have the option to edit. Now if we go into edit, you're going to see that you have some limited editing tools. So you're not going to be able to use weld, but you can do things like fill if you want to cover it in foil, the particular thing that you've scanned. You could put an extra line around the outside, so if you want to do some drawing around the outside with multiple lines, where basically what you're doing, instead of having a thin draw line, you'll have like 2 or 3 thin draw lines that basically give you a nice solid outside line. Or if you have the paper piercing option enabled, you're going to have that option to turn it into a paper piercing design as well. I'm going to go OK. It's also a way of clearing up some shapes if ignore object doesn't work for your particular paper. I'm going to go OK again. Now we are working with 150 GSM paper. It's done a scan and you can see it's quite complicated because we've got lots of little twiddly bits. So using our standard black auto blade is probably not going to be the best idea. So you have a couple of options. What you can do is use a blue blade from the CM, so that's the standard cut blade, and that will do it for you. Or you can go to the vinyl blade for the SDX, which is the pale blue cat one. So if I bring that back there, there you go. And I'm going to pop that in. And fingers crossed this works, because I need to replace my blade, because as I said, I've been doing an awful lot of vinyl work. Awful lot. So I'm going to go into please select, I'm going to cut. I'm going to go into pressure and alter that, because I find that different holders need different pressures. So in the case of my vinyl blade, I know that at the moment it's -6 until I change the blade, at which point then I will have to reassess that. And speed I'll leave at 1, because as I said, it's going to be quite intricate. It's got lots of little corners to get around, and by keeping it down at 1, you're giving it as much time as possible to get around those corners. And we can tell it to go. So, again, any more questions? I can't remember if I said hi to Louise or not. Yes, so, hi Louise. It's been one of those mornings this morning. So, for those of you that are brand new to the Scan and Cut, there are a load of beginner videos that I did right at the start of lockdown last year. Not last year, 2020 even. Sheesh, time flies. So if you go back and watch those, that can give you a nice, good basic knowledge for things that you can do with your machine. I'm going to very gently peel that up. Now, some of the thinner details it might struggle with, so just take your time when it comes to releasing it. And yeah, it's just struggled with one little branch, so it's not going to be able to be recut anyway because it's pulled up. So if I should just show you on the overhead, if you get some snagging like this, let's see, what that can mean is either the detail was too fine, even though it scanned it, but it can also mean that it's starting to show that your blade just needs to either be cleaned, so you can use a little bit of alcohol onto a cotton bud and just wipe your blade, particularly if you've been doing lots of anything that is adhesive backed. So that could be adhesive vinyl, it could be sticky back card, it could even be that you've done some double-sided adhesive in your machine, or it can mean that it's getting towards the end of its life as a blade, so it's time to swap out the blade for a new one. And let's see if we can get this off. So I'm using a metal spatula, which is going to give you the ability to get under the paper rather than just butting up to the edge of it. And it's really important if you're doing something detailed like this that you can do that. And there we go. So you can get some nice detailed cuts. And you can see even down here we've got this little stem where it's managed to do that. So suddenly all your pattern papers can become embellishments instead. And we can pop that onto our layout just there. Now there is one tiny little bit that came separate. That's okay. So I'm just going to very gently remove that from my mat. And there we go. So we can get really detailed with our cuts. So don't think, oh, it's too small, it won't manage it. It's just a case of doing the right blade with the right pressure and the right speed, and you can pull it off. And there we go. So we can start to see that our recipe is now coming together. And Corinne, don't worry, all the videos are available for you to watch back later, so you're absolutely fine. So you might be happy with that as is, or you might go, actually I just want to pop that up. Oh, bear with me one moment, I will be back in one moment. Right, I'm back. Sorry about that, I had to take a delivery. So, where did I get to? Right, I think what I'm going to do actually is just pop a little bit of card underneath just to help some of our elements pop up a little bit. So I've pulled out some other colours, and let's go for, we could go with a green. So if we lift that up very carefully, very carefully, we can pop that just on top, and we can check to see whether we're happy with the colour. So that's going to give us one look, but that reddy colour might give us a totally different look again. So this is going to warm up the card. And it's little touches like this that are going to change our design. Or we could go more towards the purpley. And I think that one looks really nice. So I'm going to go with that one. Now, remember how we saved our recipe before? We're going to bring that back into our machine so that we can do things like mats and layers. So let's slide that off there, because I know I want it to be at that card, so I can put that card onto my mat. Okay, and we can decide at this point if there's any others that we want to do. So for instance, you might want to pop up this centre rectangle here, or you might want to do the flags. Now, in terms of the flags, then you're going to want to have to use your offset function to get those kind of right. But then you could always weld a copy of that first shape back over the top to get your points, if you want to keep them nice and pointed rather than round. So I'm going to go OK, and let's go back across to Scan and Cut. I'm going to go home to reset and OK. And we can go retrieve data. I saved it on my machine. I know it's going to be down towards the bottom, so I can use my 2 arrows to get some of most recent. And there's my shapes. And it's got the most recent scan on there, so if you scan something else in the meantime, it's not going to come back in with the same scan that it did before. So I'm going to go OK. Now at this moment in time, that's quite a good little reminder for which shape is which. So I want to do an offset for this one down here, but the others I don't need so much. So if I decided that I was going to do that centre shape, then we could do that one, but I'm not going to do that. So let's delete that out. And if I wanted to do the flags, I could do those separately. So I'll delete those out for now. So I've just got that square, and I've put my card up to the top left. And because it's going to get confusing with that scan in the background, I can turn it off, so it just ignores it, and we just go back to a blank mat. So we need it to be proportionally bigger. So there's a couple of ways that you can do that. So first of all, what I'm going to do is duplicate it so I can show you the 2 ways that we can do it. So they're both the same size. Now on the first shape, I'm going to use offset. So we're going to use the offset key, and it's going to say how much of a distance do you want. Now what to bear in mind is, if you say choose an offset distance of 1.5 mil, what that's actually doing is adding on 3 mil to the width in its entirety and 3 mil to the height in its entirety. So that when we come to actually do the next option, you can match it. And I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. So let's go for 3 mil. So it's a nice obvious border at this point. You might decide that it's a bit too much, but let's see. Because we don't want to cover up too much of our floral paper that we've got underneath. So that's going to add on 6 mil to our rectangle. So the other option, go into duplicate and add an extra copy. We're going to go into resize, and this is where we're going to use that ratio function. So turn that blue, and we're going to count 6 mil in both directions. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so those are your 2 ways that you can do an offset. So it all depends on what you want. So in terms of the rectangle, you can't really see at the moment, but an offset can give you a bit of a roundy corner sometimes. Whereas doing a duplicate and resizing it in that way, then you know that you're going to have those same corner points. So it really is up to you. So I'm going to go OK. Now obviously we don't need those inside shapes. We only need the one larger one. So at the moment a larger one is selected, so I'm going to pop that over there. So I know that's the one I'm keeping. I'm going to go to OK. Multi-select, tap off so that nothing is selected, back to our window, and everything else we can just select, OK, delete, and done. And there's a larger rectangle. So at the moment that's going to give us a 3mm border. So if I pop back overhead, I keep a ruler on my desk so it's nice and easy to measure and just see how much of a difference that makes. So that 3mm is going to give us quite a thick border. So on some designs you'll be happy with that, others you might not. I think though for this one I'm going to go with, just so that you can see it as is. So let's go close scan. I'm going to go OK, and because it's a rectangle that we're cutting, I can just go back to my standard blade. There's nothing fancy in it, so we can go OK, back to cut, just lower that pressure back down. So basically you want to find the lowest pressure that you can get away with that gives you a nice cut, and that is going to help your blade to last longer. So it's very rare that you will see me use a positive pressure in my machine. Okay. So it's just caught just on that top edge, but that's okay. Sometimes if it does that, it's just quicker to just snip it off. I should have had my Weetabix this morning. There we go. So I'm just going to trim that nice and neatly, like so. We can then pop our card over the top. And this would be where you would then stamp your sentiment, like so. So preferably before you do your next bit of assembly, but I'll do that just so that you can see it all go together. So that's going to go across there. That one's going to go like that. And next you need to decide if you want to put a colour front on your card. So typically if I do that, I might not necessarily use a full-on card. Sometimes I'll swap to a paper, but you could actually use an insert. So just going to grab an insert collection that matches. And let's take a few out there and see what we get. So we could use our element here, or we could focus more in the solid colour if you just want to have something that's going to pull that colour through. So I'm just going to slide that underneath very gently. Just so that we can test out roughly if we want it. So we're going to lose our scan detail here if we have too much floor there. But what you could do is actually rotate it so that the floor comes down this side, or just very simply move it across. So the top edge of the flag is going to be the top edge of our card. and it might be just a little bit too much. So one option is, if you definitely want that floral there, is you can do an overlay with some vellum and then use the vellum to soften that pattern before you then have your other elements on top. So to adhere your vellum, you can basically apply adhesive wherever you have elements on top of that vellum. So you would do it underneath where your flags are, underneath where your border piece is, and underneath here as well. And then you can always do like some little gems and things to hide other bits of adhesive. So we could go to something like this where you've got more of a corner detail. Or we could go to that colour. Let's try that one, because we haven't really got much grey in our card, so it should pop a little bit more. So then we've got our floral element coming in here. It's up to you whether you think this floral bit up the top gives you enough contrast or not, but you can always just move it down so you've just got a bit of floral here without having that stretching all the way across, and we'll go from there. Because we want to go edge to edge, rather than using our scan and cut, we can use our trimmer. Just going to rotate it around this way so it's a little bit easier to see where I'm measuring. So A6, we want 105 about there, so let's rotate that around that way. And again, you don't necessarily have to go edge to edge. If you want to bring in slightly, you could do. Trimmer needs a little sharpen. And 148.5, so about there. And let's go for that one. There we go. Going to give that a quick tidy up before I go too far. So then once we've kind of stuck this all together, you can stick it onto an A6 card, or if you want to, you can go up to size up so that you have a bit of a white border all the way around. So let's start with our flags so that we can position where we want that border to go. So going across that way. So with texture card, you kind of have two options as to how much texture you want. I think I might do it that way so I get a bit more texture. And that flag. So then when I come to actually stick the border down, I can judge by my grid where I want to put it. So I want to go about 3 squares down. So, anyway, the double-sided. God, blimey, it's a long one today, but we did get that interruption. So. Okay. Flowers to the bottom, which is where we had it before. Let's tuck in any adhesive that's hanging over the edge. Now, if it helps, rotate your paper, but remember that you want to line it up on the grid on your cutting mat. get that in position. So 3 that way, 3 there, and down we go. Then we can do our flags. And I have issues with picking stuff up today, obviously. It's gone very quiet. The comments stopped working. Or if I sent you all to sleep, going, come on, Natty. Okay, so foliage one first. Then we're going to go for the pink. That side. So I'm just going to line that up to my grid again, and it might be that we just put a little bit of a gap in there, like so. And the last one for the flags. There we go. I'm going to set that to one side and let's focus on our panel here. So I'm going to ask you to use your imagination and think that I've stamped my sentiment on here. I think that might be because you're the only one commenting in the group, Deb. I think everybody else is on the page. And I don't know if there might be some comments in the event as well, but I can't see that at the same time. So when we cut with our electronic cutter, you tend to get like a little bit of a curled edge. So if you want to flip it over so that's hidden, you can do that, that's fine. You can also cut so that you put good side down to the mat as well. If there's something particular that isn't necessarily cutting very well, you can do it that way round. But do remember, if you're going to do that, a really important thing is to flip your design as well. So especially if you've got some that are cutting up the right way, some that are cutting the wrong way as such, then flip those elements that you need to. I'm going to line this so that it goes into the middle, and like so. And of course, when you're doing this, you can take a little bit longer than what I'm doing. I'm just going to do a little bit double-sided, just to stick our flower down. Now, another top tip, if you've got something like this that you want to scan and cut out, then what I would suggest doing is just putting a little bit of double-sided adhesive on the back. Don't peel off the backing sheet, obviously. Then stick that down onto your mat, and you're going to have the option then to do either a full cut or a half cut. Either option will work fine. But what it will do is that adhesive will help give your paper a little bit more rigidity. Okay, so yeah, then you can be a bit more rough in it with it and things. So especially if you want to do like any kind of stamping or embossing after. So let's just pop that there. What I tend to do is, if you look at the details, let me see if I can get that a little bit closer, is just be aware of where your details finish, so that you're not getting like random holes. So like this bit here is clear of all card, but this bit finishes on the edge. That bit's clear, but that bit's got a little bit shown. So what I'll do is just angle it very slightly, and likewise there's no pink poking out here, and that's where it's going to go. I'm just going to press that down, and I'm going to get up with a little bit. Now, for something like this, it's a little bit more fiddly. I'm just going to use a little bit of glue, just so it's a little bit less likely to stick. With glue, less is more. So, just going to pop that so that this stem kind of curls in like so. So then it looks like it's growing into our frame. Flip this over. So for our biggest section, we can just use double-sided, that's absolutely fine. Hey, don't turn the page. So typically when we go live, we'll try and either go to both the group and the page, or it'll just be the page. But I'm also trying to get into the habit of putting up events as well, because then it's easier for people to find us before we go live, rather than relying on notifications, which don't always seem to work. So once again, apology for the little interruption, but it was a delivery I needed to take. So I have a very busy craft room at the moment, which is good. So I can put a little bit of glue just on these bits that are sticking out. So with the aqua glue, it is very runny, so you want to try and use like little tiny dabs. And don't squeeze, you really don't need to squeeze it. Okay. So with that done, let's bring in my piece. Like so, and then we can layer it up. Now I could have gone for some foam tape, but because we've got those little bits that are kind of dangling off the edge, I just want to make sure that they're supported. So I'm going to take that out. Let's go there so that we can still see that other shape is a flag. I'm going to do it so that that corner intersects with that cut line just there. Hopefully get it level. And there we go. Then we can just tap down our bits of foliage where we put that extra glue on. So with the aqua glue, it takes a little bit longer to stick than, say, like the Sticks 2 3D PVA, which is my other go-to. But it also tends to not crinkle when we're using thinner things like paper. It is more t-shirts, so if you'd have seen my hallway earlier this week, it was quite funny. Thank you, Mum. So there we go. Hopefully you've enjoyed that. Let me know if you want me to put up a image with the other sketches so that you can have a play, and I'll put those into the event page. And I look forward to see the rest of the journey with you. So, as I said, these recipe projects are going to start appearing both in the new book that I'm writing and in the magazine when we get there. Not entirely sure it's going to release in September, or certainly not the beginning of September. It might be more towards the end of the month. So, just to give me a bit more time, because we've had some mad orders. So, hence bundles of t-shirts. I hope you've really enjoyed today and learned a little bit about your machine in the process. If you have any questions, you can always reach me, and I will quite happily answer any questions you may have. If it's something that needs a demo, typically what I'll do is I'll note it down and I will use it for a future stream so that you can see and everybody else can join in too. Take care, and I look forward to seeing you next week when we've got a bit of a project. So, over the weekend, if you don't usually eat a lot of cereal, now's the weekend to do it. So you're going to need some of the little fun size cereal boxes for next week, and we're going to be doing a stream on Tuesday, Wednesday, and probably Thursday and Friday too. So it's a nice little project. You're going to be making some little storage drawers just using cereal boxes and some pretty card. So take care for now, and I will see you next week. Have a fab weekend, and bye.